102 years ago, on the 11th day of the 11th month, the First World War ended. The Great War was meant to be, in the words of H.G. Wells, the war to end all wars. Unfortunately, the roll of honour behind me is testimony to the fact that wars have not ended and there are still many conflicts raging across the globe. Today we meet, albeit virtually, in a simple act of remembrance to honour the memory of those Stranmillis students whose names are on the College War Memorial, and to remember those from all over these islands and beyond, both service personnel and civilians, who died in the two world wars and in more recent conflicts. We remember not only the lives cut short, but also lives that have been changed forever by the atrocities of war. War is a horrific and brutalizing experience, but the sheer scale of suffering and devastation of the Great War is difficult to comprehend. It is estimated that the total number of military and civilian casualties in World War I was around 40 million. The final death toll is uncertain, but it is estimated to be in the region of 20 million. Despite the fact that there was no conscription in Ireland, over 200,000 Irishmen from across the island served in the British forces during the First World War. Some 35,000 Irish soldiers died in the conflict. Statistical information helps us to appreciate the scale of the loss, but does little to give us insight into the depth of human suffering. That is where what Virginia Woolf referred to as the raw stuff of poetry comes into its own right. Poetry is, according to Simon Armitage, the current poet laureate, resolutely compact. Research has shown that in some towns and villages, entire generations were completely wiped out. Many of the soldiers, including the 250,000 teenagers who joined the British Army to fight in the First World War, were ill prepared. No wonder Wilfred Owen, in the opening line of his poem, Anthem for Doomed Youth, uses the phrase, "These who die as cattle." Wilfred Owen is regarded as one of the giants of World War I poetry, despite the fact that he only published 5 poems during his lifetime. He has been described as the greatest poet of the war. He enlisted in the British Army in 1915 and soon found himself caught up in the fierce fighting of the Western Front. Suffering from shell shock in 1917, Owen was sent to convalesce at a hospital in Scotland. It was there that he began to write about the horrors of war and tried to find words to describe what it was like for soldiers to experience bombardments and gas attacks. Despite his reservations about the war effort, Owen returned to the front lines in August 1918. He was killed in action in France on the 4th of November 1918, just a few days before World War I finally came to an end. Dr. Andrew Brown will now read Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen.
What passing belts for those who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds.
The heaviest loss of life for a single day occurred on July the 1st, 1916, during the Battle of the Somme. The British Army suffered 57,470 casualties, and over 19,000 men were killed. Some 3,500 Irishmen died during the savage 4.5-month Battle of the Somme, a battle like so many that involved the horrific experience of trench warfare. It has been calculated that 35,000 miles of trenches were built during World War I. Poets, sometimes referred to as trench poets, who fought in such battles, captured the horrors of the battlefield in their poetry. Using a new, unadorned kind of poetic language, they sought to capture the reality of life in uniform, and in particular, the realities of modern warfare. There was an authenticity attached to this kind of writing. These poems were not constructed primarily as works of literature, but rather were an attempt to capture the raw realities of war. The Scottish poet Walter Scott Stuart Lyon paints a vivid picture of what it is like to lose a comrade and friend in the trenches. Walter Lyon had joined the 9th Royal Scots Regiment in 1910 after graduating in law from Edinburgh University. In 1915, he was posted to France. His war poetry was written during his brief time at the front line between the 9th and 20th of April, in trenches and dugouts and during shelling. He was killed on the 8th of May 1915 during the Second Battle of Ypres. Walter Lyon is commemorated as one of the war poets on the Menin Gate Memorial. Dr. Michael Ivers will now read I Tracked a Dead Man Down a Trench by Walter Lyon.
I tracked a dead man down a trench. I knew not he was dead. They told me he had gone that way, and there his footmarks led. The trench was long and close and curved, it seemed without an end. And as I threaded each new bay, I thought to see my friend. At last I saw his back. He crouched as still could be, and when I called his name aloud, he did not answer me. The floorway of the trench was wet, where he was crouching dead. The water of the pool was brown, and round him it was red. I stole up softly where he stayed, with head hung all down slack, and on his shoulders laid my hands and drew him gently back. And then, as I had guessed, I saw his head and how the crown. I saw then why he crouched so still, and why his head hung down.
The female voice is often drowned out by the dominance of the male poets of the First World War. Vera Brittain produced a collection of poems in 1919 that describes the war from a female perspective. As she put it in her poem, The Sisters Buried at Lemnos, seldom they enter into song or story. Poets praise the soldiers' might and deeds of war, but few exalt the sisters and the glory of women dead beneath a distant star. Vera Brittain had first-hand experience of the carnage of World War I during her 3 years' service as a British voluntary aid detachment nurse in France and Malta. During that time, she suffered several personal tragedies, including the death of her brother and fiancé both of whom were killed in action. In 1915, she had been granted leave from her nursing duties for Christmas Day and went in great excitement to Brighton to await the evening boat train, which was to bring Roland, her fiancé, home on Christmas leave. She waited in the lounge of the Grand Hotel for the telephone that would bring news of his arrival. By 10 o'clock that night, no news had come. She concluded that Christmas calls had overwhelmed the telephone system and went to bed, exhausted but unperturbed. In the morning, she was called to the telephone and rushed to hear the voice she had waited so long to hear. But the voice was not that of Roland. It was a message to say that he had died of wounds at a casualty clearing station on December 23rd. She later wrote, "Only gradually did I realize that the war had condemned me to live to the end of my days in a world without confidence or security, a world in which every dear personal relationship would be fully cherished under the shadow of apprehension." She captured the depth of her loss in a poem published in February 1916, entitled Perhaps. Mrs. Katrina Rogers will now read Perhaps by Vera Britton.
Perhaps some day the sun will shine again, and I shall see that still the skies are blue, and feel once more I do not live in vain, although I feel bereft of you. Perhaps the golden meadows at my feet will make the sunny hours of spring seem gay, and I shall find the white May blossoms sweet, though you have passed away. Perhaps the summer woods will shimmer bright, and crimson roses once again be fair, and autumn harvest fields a rich delight, although you are not there. Perhaps some day I shall not shrink in pain to see the passing of the dying year, and listen to the Christmas songs again, although you cannot hear. But though kind time may many joys renew, there is one greatest joy I shall not know again, because my heart for loss of you was broken long ago.
In the English language, the word perhaps is used to show that something is possible. Perhaps our act of remembrance is an opportunity for us to consider how we can proactively contribute to the avoidance of war and all the miseries and human suffering that accompanies it. One of our former students, Captain Henry James Christie, is the third name on our roll of honour. He paid the ultimate sacrifice during the Second World War. His photograph helps to put a face to the name. It is a poignant reminder of the price paid by the individual in the line of duty. It challenges us to renew our commitment to become peacemakers. I now invite some members of our student executive who will read tributes to some of our former students who served in the Second World War and paid the ultimate sacrifice.
This year we remember George Arnold Exley. He was born on the 3rd of November 1918 and attended the college from 1937 to 1939 when he transferred to the Queen's University. He became a flying officer in 27th Squadron of the RAF Volunteer Reserve and was killed aged 26 on active service on the 20th of June 1945 in Burma, while the war in Europe was already ended. He was the husband of Alice Exley. Flying Officer Exley is buried in the Rangoon War Cemetery. Francis Wilson Galbraith. He was born on the 14th of January 1915 and completed his final year in college in 1935. He taught at Edenderry School and then became a sergeant pilot in the RAF Volunteer Reserve. He died aged 27 on the 25th of July 1942 of malaria on board a ship at sea on the West African coast while on his way home after training in South Africa. Sergeant Galbraith is commemorated on the memorial to those with no known grave in the El Alamein War Cemetery in Egypt.
John Malcolmson Gibson was born on the 29th of March 1912, the son of James and Mary Gibson of Newtonards, County Down, and completed his final year in college in 1933 to 1934. He taught at Ballystockart School, Cumber, County Down, and became a lieutenant of 5th Battalion, 45 Light Ack Regiment Royal Artillery. He died aged 30 on the night of the 20 to the 21st of June 1942 in Libya during the North African Campaign. He was buried in the Knightsbridge War Cemetery, 25 kilometres west of Tobruk on the road to Benghazi. James Quinn Jamieson was born on the 23rd of December 1917, the son of Robert and Janetti Jamieson of Resharkin, County Antrim, and he was a student of the college from 1936 to 1938. He transferred to Queen's University, where he completed a Bachelor of Arts degree and a diploma in education. He left Queen's in 1940 and joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve and became a pilot flying officer based at RAF Rednall. He was killed in active service on the 30th of May 1945, aged 27. He is buried in St Andrew's Church Graveyard, Resharkin.
Norman Harry Keel's date of birth was the 22nd of April 1920, and he was a student at the college for 2 years, from 1938 to 1940. His parents were Albert Edward and Wilhelmina Keel of Belfast. Unfortunately, he never got the opportunity to take up a teaching post. He joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve and became a pilot flying officer before being killed aged 23 whilst training in Canada on the 7th of May 1943. He is buried in Rosedale Cemetery, 3.2 kilometres west of the industrial city in Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan, which was the base for No. 32 Solo Flying School during the 1939 to 1945 war. The cemetery on Caribou Street West, interestingly, contains the graves of some 48 British and Canadian Air Force personnel killed on training flights. Adam Linton was born on the 17th of June 1911, the son of Robert John and Elizabeth Linton, and entered the college in 1930. Unfortunately, he failed his teaching practice in 1931 to 1932 academic year and subsequently failed his resit the following year. He was the husband of Ivy Beatrice Linton of York. He joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was killed on a bombing mission on the 20th of October 1944, aged 33, and is buried with 7 other members of his aircrew in the churchyard of Winsebach, 48 kilometres northwest of Strasbourg in France. Aircrews of bombers which had crashed or been shot down were often buried together in a local civil graveyard rather than a war cemetery. Since it was impossible to distinguish individual bodies, the gravestones were usually erected, touching each other, and the bodies were buried together.
It was Herbert Hoover, the former President of the United States of America, who said, "Older men declare war, but it is the youth that must fight and die." I now invite Jonathan Reid, our student president, to lay the wreath on behalf of the college.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today.
I would just like to thank all of the members of the student executive and the student body and members of staff who helped and contributed to this event. Thank you.